In this video, I'm going to convert this 2-gallon aquarium that I've had since like the 90s into a 2-gallon terrarium. And when this was an aquarium, it came with an undergravel filter and had a tube you put an air stone in. Well, I'm not sure where that is at the moment. So I'm going to make my own bottom with a wall. And the reason why I want to make a bottom, those of you who know me know I don't like to put all these different layers in my terrariums, but this way I can have certain things growing in more of a hydroponic style setup. So to make the bottom and the walls on the sides, what I'm going to use is simple plastic canvas you buy at like Hobby Lobby. You can get an enormous sheet, and let me show you close up like this. It's a little more flexible than I hoped, but it should do the trick, especially because this isn't such a large size for a terrarium. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this up. I'm not going to spare you the trauma of watching me cut it up and the boredom and etc. You know, surely once you see the final product, you can figure out how to do it on your own. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this up and show you what I cut it, or how it looks after I cut it up. So I cut a hexagonal shape, folded these over. It's a little too tight, and this was a little taller that it's sticking above the trim at the bottom of the tank, but instead of cutting this down, I'm just going to have it basically bent in, and then the weight will push it down. It was a little snug, which is good, but because these taper down, I should have cut this a little taller, but it's still going to be behind there, but I wanted it to be a tight fit. So this folds over, and it will basically give me a nice wall which I can grow other things on here. Maybe some Tillandsias or miniature orchids. So this is what I have. So I'm going to rinse out the interior of the aquarium with distilled water just to make sure any impurities are gone, and we can start with the build. Digging around in the attic, trying to find some old rocks I used when I had an aquarium set up, I discovered or found this piece that I was looking for. Albeit it's being smaller, it would be more concealed, but I'm still going to go with the one I cut because I can have that wall and grow some micro orchids in there. So I folded this down like that, and hopefully it will look okay and won't be an eyesore at the bottom of the terrarium build. As you can see, it's quite tight. I could always make it a little bit smaller, at least in the front, but when I put things in, it's going to go down and still have a little reservoir for water underneath. And you know, like I mentioned earlier, I wish I had the top a little bit longer, but it's going to be fine either way. Now, instead of using rocks as I had intended, I found some really cool driftwood. So let me move this over for a moment and show you. I found this piece, and I had a nail or screw that was getting a little rusty, so I cleaned the bottom with rubbing alcohol and put a piece of brown self-adhesive craft foam. And then I just didn't want to, I went ahead and cut a piece of black one versus more brown, and I covered the top around the base of the driftwood in self-adhesive craft foam. And the reason I did that is because rocks are inert. Wood will leach nutrients into the soil, and especially since this was in an aquarium, I didn't want to take that risk since I want to put some carnivorous plants in there. So at least this way we'll minimize leaking into the soil so the plants can still do well. And I found another piece of driftwood. This was on a small piece of slate, and that screw was rusty, and I had a lot of rust here, so I covered that as well, and I'm just going to wedge that in there. And it's going to look nice, hopefully. So now that we have this piece, I'm going to stick this in here and see how it looks. Kind of want to use a smaller piece of slate, like shave that up off or something. I don't want it to risk it scratching the wall, but here you can see how it fits. And just playing around, this piece going back there will look nice. It's going to be a tight fit, but hopefully it will do good, and makes it more difficult to find a good place for an orchid, doesn't it? But we'll make do with what we have. One tricky part is trying to cover this in sphagnum moss, and I wish I had enough live sphagnum moss to go on here, but I don't. So I'm going to use the dead kind or the dry kind, and hopefully over time it could. Some people say it will come back to life, others don't. I seem to think it may, because moss tends to dry up and then rejuvenate. And from what I read online, the orchid moss that you find at Lowe's is the kind of sphagnum that will actually grow, whereas the others that come into the country are treated. So that's something to ponder. Then I have this mesh. It was used from a bag you buy at the grocery store with avocados. You can get kind with onions. And I don't have a piece big enough to cover the whole side, but it will cover enough, and if this moss does come to life, or as I add plants to it in the coming weeks, I can start hiding more of the white. So what I'm going to do is put more layers of the dry sphagnum moss on here. I wonder if I should moisten it first. That might be a good idea. I do have a little bit that I have moistened, so I could put that, and then, yeah, it's less brittle, so I'm going to just put wet sphagnum moss. So give me a few minutes to get enough wet so I can put this in, and then I'm going to cover it with that. Stick what I can up through it, and hopefully that will work. While waiting for the sphagnum moss to fully soak up the distilled water, I'm going to go ahead and set up this miniature pond that's going to be in there. You think, why am I setting up a miniature pond? I have this self-adhesive craft foam which will go on the bottom, and then because of the adhesion, I'm using a piece of non-self-adhesive, just regular craft foam that will go on the inside. And I'm going to be planting in this some Azolla cristata, formerly known as Azolla caroleana. And before I apply this, though, I'm going to put a little bit of foaming Gorilla Glue on the edge just to make sure this will be watertight, because you don't want it to leak. But even if it does, there'll be enough moisture to keep the Azolla happy. But I'm going to just put a little dab. Because it's foams, I'm afraid to put too much. I have a fragment of toothpick, so I'm just going to smear this all the way around. And hopefully I can get this amount all the way. This kind turns white, and I don't really like it, but it's what I have access to at the moment. I'll just put another dab on the other end. Okay. I want to make sure I have the entire edge, though, coated with it, because I want to make sure it will be a watertight seal. Although I don't know how waterproof this glue is, but it's better than nothing. Hopefully condensation and stuff will prevent any water from evaporating too much, or may even result in more settling to keep it at the right level. Okay, may have put a little too much, but at least this is the underside. Now this plastic thing is basically like a collar to go on like a light socket. So I ordered some a while back off the internet, and they were not the right size. You know, they always, like, especially when you buy off eBay, sometimes they always give you the wrong impression about their product, and you think you're getting the right thing, and they falsely advertise. So it did not fit. Anyway, so now what I'm gonna, the tricky part is I cut this a little smaller so it should go, I didn't make it too snug. Okay, there we go. And let's see, we'll stick that in there. Make sure this is, so you can see it's starting to foam. I should have called this glue Rabid. Anyway, I'm gonna let this glue, I could put some inside, I guess, but I'm gonna let this sit and dry before I plant my little piece of azolla that I picked up. Basically, it's similar to duckweed, only it's considered by some the world's smallest fern. So yeah, I'll have a fern in this terrarium setup. So I got me some Loctite super glue, and here I have a Tillandsia ionantha I picked up at Lowe's yesterday, and I should have bought two because I may go back and buy another one. This one I can stick here, another one can sit there, and even though this will be closer to the light, because this the lights these days are LED, I'm hoping it will be fine, but I may research the lighting requirements. But let's see, let's see how I want to have this in here. So I think that will be good. So then it's leaning a little forward and give you a better perspective. So now that I know how I want it, sometimes you see people, like when you buy them in stores, they use like hot glue guns to adhere them to ornaments or things. So I figure this will be fine for it. The one thing you don't want with Tillandsias is to have them in contact with any metal. I learned from a video I saw on YouTube one time that is a sure way to kill your Tillandsia. So then we said this will be like that. So I'm just going to have this sit here, and that should look nice in there. So I need to have this sit like this for a few minutes, just so that it gets stuck, but I think it looks nice and really well on here. So this terrarium build should be nice. I don't have all the plants I want for it, so in the upcoming weeks, as I get more plants that will be suitable, I'll be making another video or two at least about this. So I had this strung across and I was weaving the sphagnum through, and I'm like, this is tedious and useless. And it kept falling a little bit and everything, so I realized I can get a much thicker layer by stringing fishing line through here. So I strung it across, back, loop, etc. You can see a little bit on the edge. I should have wrapped the sphagnum a little bit around, but I want this as flush as I can to the back. So I plan to eventually seed this with some live sphagnum moss and other plants that may start hiding the edges, along with growing some orchids here. But I don't have all the plants I want to put in here because this is a work in progress that I'm going to see what would be fitting to put where. So now with that mentioned, I want to go ahead and put this inside the 2-gallon aquarium. My apologies for such a tight camera angle, but I am filming this in the bathroom using the vanity lights. I found they give good lighting, and I don't have much to show in there, but some fell, a little bit fell, but most of it didn't. And it seems to be okay. Pieces that came off, I'll just move them over. I can add them with the finishing touches. Oh, it's fitting like crazy, isn't it? I did put a little too much on there, but it was easier to put too much and have better coverage than not enough, and I don't have much coverage on that corner. Anyway, with this done, I can now put the big piece of driftwood in there. And I'm losing more. I think that's how I'm going to have it. Oh, my poor Tillandsia. I should have glued that in at the very end of the build. Anyway, I have that, and I'll put this like that. Yeah, I think I like that way. And I'm glad to show you that I had to move this, but I'm glad that it did not leak at all. So here's what I have so far. I had to take this out because I kept messing with it. I didn't want to damage it. And I suspect, if you notice right there, I suspect it may be flowering. So here I have a Pinguicula. I'm not sure what species, but it could be a primuliflora, if I even pronounce it right, and some live sphagnum moss and some little baby ones. And I also pulled a few other plants from the garden. Here I have some bladderworts that were growing. Here are some dead bladderworts and little moss, but I also have a Drosera spatulata here. I have another Drosera, I think it's a capillaris. I may plant it if I have space. I have some moss here. And it's just hard in such a small area and with that wood taking up more space. Here I have a King Henry cultivar of Venus flytrap. I've had so much rain that they're not doing too well because they were sitting in a lot of water, so hopefully in the terrarium it may do better, but I'm a little hesitant with this because they require dormancy, so I may have to pull it out eventually. So these are what I'm going to try to put in here. Now since this pot is huge, I'm going to use the rest, I put some peat moss in. I'm going to use the bottom part to fill up the rest, and then figure out where I'm going to put the plants, especially with that pond. So here's what it looks like in the inside. Since this keeps shedding because I put way too much, it just took less time to put too much. And if you lose some, no big deal. If you put just enough, you lose some. Oh no. I have a pile of stuff that's shed. I have a little bit more, but as the sphagnum moss is mixed down there with the butterwort starts to spread, I'll be taking some, putting it in here, and as I shed more of these down and take them out, I should have a nice green wall. And I plan to get some micro orchids. I don't have any orchids at the moment, unless you consider the bladderworts orchids, because they're considered from the same family. Anyway, so this bladderwort, the flower, the blossom isn't standing up straight. That's driving me crazy, but plus they all got compacted in there, but as it spreads it will look nice. And as the Pinguicula seedlings on the leaf tips start to grow, I could also transfer them into the I can't even speak anymore, into the sphagnum moss, and have them growing alongside the orchids up here. I had to reattach this. Since it's a small deep one, it's hard to just get in there with my hands, but since I had to reattach this, I'm thinking another one may go here. I think the same variety would look good. Maybe I can find a smaller specimen. Although when I got this yesterday, it was the reddest one. Others are red, but not as spectacular. And then over here, let me move this sphagnum moss over. I have a little bit more live sphagnum moss right down there in the darkness where you can't see. I had this Venus flytrap here as I was setting it, but I realigned it to there so you can see it down there. And then I put the spatulata here. I have the pond over here ready to be filled up with water. And I'm debating about putting a couple Drosera capillaris leaves over here and just let them propagate on their own. So I may do that. Spatulata I've found to be the easiest sundew to propagate. They just propagate really fast and like crazy. If you find any other species you consider easy, please leave a comment below. I've read online that Drosera capensis, if I even said it right, the Cape sundew, is one of the easiest to propagate, but I have not had luck with those. So anyway, feel free to leave comments on the ease of them, and let me get some dirt off there. So I can now go ahead and get my trusty wash bottle filled with distilled water. I like to get the edges just to wash down any debris that landed on the glass, and I'm also going to remove any debris that's off here. Hopefully yeah, now they're starting to spread and look better. And then I have to be careful with the pond so I don't start losing plant to the environment. And as moss gets to the edge of the water, you won't have that ring. So this is like, some people make terrariums. I need to water this too, don't I? Some people make terrariums and they have plants all ready to go, and then you end up having to prune them. Well, what about making a terrarium where you just add as you go along and you put smaller examples so you don't have to, there we go, so you don't have to prune as much. If you notice, I also have, let me show you, here is higher than there, it slopes down. Same thing with here, so it gives you a little bit of perspective. And I need to clean this glass. Anyway, so let me finish giving this a good watering, and I'll go ahead and the lid to this is a piece of plexiglass or polycarbonate, and the light fixture, years ago you'd get a 15-watt incandescent, and it deformed this, from the heat, so I may just cut a fresh piece of plexiglass. I've thought about heating that up and sandwiching it between two flat objects or boards or something just to flatten out, so I may try that, or I may just cut a fresh piece of plexiglass to go in there. And I have now an LED light bulb, but the General Electric ones, they have that brand that they have at Lowe's. The filament is all the way on the end and it's no longer centered in the hood, so I ordered a couple with much longer LED filaments in there off Amazon. So next weekend I should get them, and hopefully I'll get an orchid or two before then to put on the wall, so I may make another video, follow-up video soon. Just as I was going to move this and take the photo or show you the front view, I thought, let me straighten this. It seemed a little off, and I pushed down from the bottom, so I ended up having to remove this because it started leaking, reinforced the bottom with more glue, and I added another layer of self-adhesive craft foam because I didn't want to wait for that glue to dry too much. So anyway, now I can go ahead and put the Hermie back down in there. Don't know if you name your plants like me or other people do. Okay, and while I was waiting for the glue to dry, I went to the backyard, and in some water I got these two little fish. Okay, I know they're mosquito larvae. So I'm going to have both plants and animals in there, and since this is rainwater, I feel confident, or I feel that it's safe enough to put in there. So let's see. Okay, good. I got them, both of the mosquito larvae, and it still looks like it needs to be pushed. So I'm pushing it from the edge this time, trying to get it level, because I don't want to cause another leak. And I can go ahead and, oops, clean this, add a little more water. Now the mosquitoes will be happy. albeit it's probably still not deep enough for them. But who cares? Hopefully they'll grow up, leave the nest of the pond, and get eaten by my plants. Here's the terrarium from the front, and it looks like the pond dripped a little water, but it's probably from me carrying it over because it didn't drain all the way. So that's just a little less water for those mosquitoes. So I need to put the lid on and turn it on for you guys to see. I had to not put this because you see how warped it is. So it made it really hard for the hood to sit on. So I have a little gap. Now, one thing to show you guys as well. I think it looks really nice. Anyway, one thing to show you guys as well is if you notice that side is more brightly lit than here. So here is a little darker than there, especially with the ornaments. So if I were to move this over, it's more evenly lit than if I moved it back. So I want to show you that light. Let me turn it off quickly. You can see how the filaments are not in the middle. So once I get the other lights, it will look nice, and maybe I'll use that bulb for some other build. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for upcoming videos where I add more plants and orchids to the wall in the back. And don't forget to subscribe and leave any comment on any plant ideas that would go good. I want really teeny weeny plants that would look good in here. And I would thank you in advance for those comments, so thank you. And thanks for watching. Over and out.